Hi, my name is Ronald Kongens. I'm a lawyer at the law firm MME in Switzerland. I'm working in the crypto space since 2016, and I'm doing all kind of work in Web3 industry. So I advise a lot of layer 1, layer 2 projects, but also dApps like DEXs or lending protocols. I also help to structure decentralized governance system for communities, but I also work on the regulatory side. So I help to create with banks together financial products with crypto as underlying, or help to obtain licenses for DLT trading systems. So basically everything that is related to crypto and Web3.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. What do you think are some of the core legal complexities and uncertainties created by decentralized governance models like DAOs, especially compared to traditional corporate structures?
I mean, the first thing is that it starts with the name. So it's decentralized autonomous organization, and autonomous means basically it's not influenced by people. And organization means that it's a form of organization. And when we go back to autonomous, in my opinion, it's not really autonomous, because it's at the end, it's a tool. So the governance in blockchain is used as a tool to gather an opinion. And so that's why it's human driven, it's not autonomous. And the organizational part is also questionable, because organization is, at least if you look into law, it means there are people that come together with joint resources, with a joint intent. And in blockchain, it doesn't mean that it's always the same intent. It can also be that it's just like gathering an opinion of the community. So that's why I think the term DAO is already a bit misleading. So that's why I prefer to talk about decentralized governance systems. And then whatever it is, it can then be qualified.
So you would rename it to decentralized governance systems instead of DAO?
Yeah, so that's also how I use it when I interact with my clients.
Okay, I understand. How can Web3 projects establish formal accountability frameworks and oversight mechanisms from a legal perspective?
So I think at the end, it's always the balance between giving power to the community versus doing it at the right point in time. Because especially at the beginning of a project, there are things which need to be tested. There are things that may change over time. So that's why I think it's important that if there is a decentralized governance where the community should have real power in the future, so not just signaling, that this will be done in multiple steps and not at one point in time. Because the whole concept of these governance systems is still very new and it's not very much tested. So that's why it can also be very risky if you just hand over everything from the beginning, because you don't know how the ecosystem reacts, how it works, and whether it has been properly structured for the intended purpose.
You just mentioned that it's rather new, right? But what governance best practices already exist?
I think I would say a best practice is definitely that the governance, so the more that happens on-chain, the more power the governance should have. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense that a decentralized governance system has powers on matters that are off-chain, because there it's always a risk of a discrepancy between execution and vote. Compared to where something happens on-chain, it makes a lot of sense, because you can also execute it without someone can just arbitrarily say, no, I don't want to do it because of whatever reason, because it's just on-chain and executed.
Do you think it's because in the Web3 world, code is law? Is that the reason that we try to decide everything on-chain?
I mean, code is law is interesting, but I think it only works for on-chain matters. So, and it's a question whether it's then law, but it's at least it's the rules on how an ecosystem is organized. So, for example, if there is a treasury with funds and people can make proposals, and if a proposal passes, after a few days it will be executed automatically. Or if there is an upgrade of a diamond smart contract, where then it will be automatically deployed into to the blockchain itself. I mean, in my opinion, there it's very much makes sense, as it's basically organized according to code. But it's not really law. It's just like a common sense of an agreement where people say, okay, we agree to organize our governance based on that code.
Q kind of combines the on-chain governance and the off-chain governance. Do you think that's a good solution?
Yeah, I think what Q is doing, basically, they are not specifically doing something for a specific legal framework, but they are more doing it like on a functional level. So Q offers different kind of functions, and it's up to the projects on how they want to implement it, whether they want to combine it with law or not, or whether they just gonna do it outside of law and organize themselves on multiple jurisdictional law or whatever. So it's more like on a functional level, which makes a lot of sense, because if you start creating tools which are for a specific jurisdiction, then you will never have scalability, because every jurisdiction is different, every project is different. So the functional level makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about regulation, and there has been a lot of updates recently with the eIDAS standard for identities. What potential impacts could regulation around identity, KYC, etc., have on decentralized applications and governance models?
I think it's an important part, and of course there you have then the discussion again whether people need to be KYC'd or not, because especially people in the Web3 industry don't like to disclose any data. But decentralized identities with zero-knowledge proofs are an interesting option. And I think also for the credibility of a governance system, it's important that you A, know that there is an actual person, and B, that not the same person is basically acting as multiple persons. Mm-hmm. Because if you just have a token holder voting and everyone is anonymous, you don't know if you really have a community or not.
Mm-hmm. Could be all one person.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. Do you think there's a gap between the Web3 world and the real world? Like, is it necessary to connect the Web3 world with the real world, especially regarding legal aspects?
I think so, yes, because there are barely no cases where everything can be done and executed on-chain. So there is always a link between those two, whether it comes to people need to have a salary, so they need to have an option to on or off ramp. It also means that to operate a community, in most cases, you need server storage. So you need a community forum, you need software licenses, and for that you need some kind of connectivity, at least for now, with the real world or Web 2.
You just mentioned the connectivity. What else do we need to bridge that gap between the real world and the governance world, or the Web3 world?
I mean, it's connectivity, but it's also banking. So you need to be able to execute payments. You need to be able to pay taxes. And, for example, in Switzerland, in Zug, you can already start now paying taxes directly in crypto. But nevertheless, I mean, if you need to do a payment of AWS for servers and they want to give you an invoice, so they want to have a counterparty. So I think currently there are still a lot of hurdles which still need some kind of interconnectivity with the real world, and also a proper legal qualification that the counterparty feels comfortable to interact with the decentralized structure.
I see. Mm-hmm. Looking ahead, what do you see as the most pressing legal uncertainties or issues that Web3 will need to resolve?
I think one of the most interesting discussions currently, and it's not maybe something that the industry can solve itself, is whether decentralization exists or not, and whether regulators are willing to acknowledge, if it exists, that you can do something which is regulated if it's centralized, is not regulated when it's decentralized. And I think that's a big question. And it's also relevant for decentralized governance system, because with a decentralized governance system, you may create a regulatory anchor point, so that the regulator says, I mean, you have governance, people have one token, one vote. So if there is a large token holder, it means the person controls, so the person is responsible. So let's assume you operate a decentralized exchange like Uniswap, and you have governance tokens, and then someone is a large holder. A regulator could imply that this person controls it.
Mm-hmm. How can we solve this? Do we need to treat decentralized systems differently than centralized systems? Do we need separate regulation for that?
I think it's too early to say whether we need separate regulations. I think the most important thing is that projects do not start to just imply that they are decentralized, but they are really working on being decentralized. And interestingly is that in the last 1 or 2 years, you have seen that from saying we deployed and then it cannot be changed anymore, people are going one step back and say, yes, we have deployed, but we still have admin keys and we can change some things because there could be bugs or errors, so we need to correct them. And then if you advise them, it sounds strange to them when you say, no, you can't do that, because when you start having rights to change or adjust, then you're no different than someone who is operating a centralized system. So for the industry, it's always hard to understand, but that basically they think from a security perspective would make sense. But from a regulatory perspective, control means less decentralization and also that you're going to be regulated.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about some incidents. There have been so many incidents, governance-related incidents in the last 3 years, and dozens of them, right? One very interesting, I think, is the Aragon incident, because Aragon was supposed to be a governance solution, mm-hmm. right? And after the majority attack, we learned that the governance wasn't as perfect as we thought. Could you describe what happened and how that was possible, and what's lacking in the Aragon solution?
Yeah, Aragon was, or still, it continues the project. So it's at the forefront of decentralized governance systems. And so that's why Aragon was always keen on going into decentralization and giving power to the community as soon as possible. So that's why they also decided to hand over this 200 million treasury in a step plan to the community. So they created an association in Switzerland. They made everyone a member. So basically full decentralization, giving up full control. Then basically they started with the first payment. I think it was about 300K to test. And then it doesn't took very long, and people with bad intentions started buying up tokens on the market because they have seen, okay, a large treasury, token price. So there is a discrepancy between the treasury and the actual market price. So they had the intention that they're going to buy up as much as token as possible so that they then can empty the treasury when the main treasury of 200 million is in the DAO. And this has basically shown that going to decentralization from the beginning can be very risky, because no one has ever thought, and then they have also made, if you read the blog post, they have made a lot of testing and tried to avoid any governance attacks, but no one ever knows that people are going to buy for millions tokens on the market so that they start controlling it. The beauty is they have showed an example where basically the founders lost control because they have handed over to the community. They have, though not transferred the whole treasury there, but at least for the part that has been transferred, they lost control. So they have proven that actually Aragon, the association that started the project, has given up the control over this part that has been transferred. And it was a nice example to show, but it also showed that one token, one vote can be very risky, because people with money can control.
Mm-hmm. How could we avoid things like that using the Q solution? What would be different?
Difficult question. I think at the end it's about how you implement it. And I think an important point is always that to keep in mind that a large community is more valuable than a small community with rich people. Because at the end, the more people that participate, the more you have the opinion of the community, and the better the ecosystem can grow. So that's why I think one token, one vote is not always the best option.
but maybe also regarding rule setting and rule enforcement. For example, with Q, you can write rules in the constitution so that these things are not possible. Even if you have the majority of tokens, you can avoid exploits like that. Do you think this is an approach, or is it again too centralized? Is it not?
No, 100%. I mean, then the question is always how you enforce it. Is it a group of people that have veto rights, for example? So that's also that the Aragon project had. So they had some guardians with a specific task. So if the funds are misused, then they have to veto. I think these are definitely good mechanisms on how you can avoid these exploits. And I mean, we're quickly going back to Aragon, we have to say that it didn't work out. So the structure held up. It's not that basically the funds have been taken out. So it basically worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely what you have in Q with these rules that can be on-chain enforced. I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. That's all. Thank you so much for your time.